and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the McConaughey at YouTube with another question and answer session. Haven't done one for a little while. Asked for your questions 1 week ago. Today we will be answering them. Just a couple of updates. I'm going to be running out of videos soon, and there's going to be a vlog. We're going to talk about what's happening with the channel. Unfortunately, I'm going through some life changes. Some interesting things are happening, both in the studio for the McConaughey and me in real life. This will not affect content too much. That will be discussed in 2 to 3 weeks. There's a very big project coming up that I'm going to do something that's never really been done before, and release it as a built model kit with full comprehensive tutorial and methods of how to do the same. It is related to 3D printing, even though today I've been having a bit of problems with the component I'm working on. As soon as I'm done, I'm going to crunch along. But now, most important thing is your questions. First question is from John Tam. Is it difficult to add a heavy weapon system for master grade Hainu version Katoki to a master grade new Gundam versus Katoki? How would you do it? I am not familiar with those two kits. I remember one is fairly modern, fancy looking. It's got like the whole unicorn inner frame psycho thingy. The old one had a lot of extra weapons, funnels and backpacks and all sorts of things. How I would personally do it, and I've got different ways of doing things, I'll purchase both models. I would snap the new version car first. I would put together the Hainu weapon systems, backpacks, anything that you want to add across, not disturbing the main kit of course. Finding out if there's any pegs or stuff that you can snap together, since it's made by the same dude, same series, same line. Sometime in between there's a chance they will snap together. It's probably worth Googling it. If that is not the case, if it has not been done, you could look at what pegs that the Hainu existingly has for its backpack and areas, and you may be able to remove the backpack, keep the pegs, and glue the heavy weapon new systems pieces on. If that also does not work, I highly recommend looking at my tutorial on magnets. 10 by 1 mil magnets. These little bastards are very good. They can hold quite a bit of weight. You can sort of remove some material in the back of the Hainu, the back of the weapons pack, put some putty, super glue the magnet in, allow for a day to dry, and it will be magnetized to the back. Another way is taking the resin route. You could just fill the holes, the peg holes, with putty, let it set, drill holes, pin it, and permanently glue it in the back. There is lots and lots of different methods. You're not alone. Another one is if it sticks to the torso of the Hainu, maybe you can just use the Hainu torso and all the limbs, head and everything else of just the new version car. Again, best course of action, buy both kits, put it together, and you keep test fitting, looking, drawing, testing, experimenting, dry fitting. Best way around it. Maybe the expensive way, but it's the best way. But by the looks of it, for now, you're probably buying both kits, so there's nothing to lose. If you have any further troubles, let me know, and post it around as well, and see who can help and throw suggestions in. Should not be a difficult modification. Multi-heart. How would you properly paint a clear plastic part? So if we got a clear plastic part, I mean, you can just paint it normal, prime, solid colour, but I assume with a clear part you want it to still remain translucent or transparent. Still need to prime it, and the best way to prime it is get some lacquer clear. Lacquer clear has very heavy solvents in it. It has a tendency of etching and attaching to the plastic. So you hit your model with some lacquer clear, Mr. Hobby Clear, automotive clear, whatever. Allow it to dry, and you buy some other clears. Mr. Hobby, or Mr. Colour I should say, has a wonderful range of clear paints, and all you have to do is simply thin it 50-50, very, very lightly dust it on, put on a clear top coat, polish it up if you have to, and it's going to look quite lovely. I have painted clears. I've mostly gotten something that's an established coloured clear and tried to change or manipulate the colour with success and failure. If it's a red or a blue, trying to get a blue to a red or a red to a blue is very difficult. You're just putting a clear pigment over a clear pigment, and it's just going to get less transparent and look a bit strange. If you've got a bit of leftover runner, you can test on that. Though something that's a very light transparent colour, you could probably get away with it. Something that's yellow-blue. Blue you can turn to green pretty easy. Green you can turn to blue. Yellow you can turn to blue, green, red. Yellow is a very weak colour. But it all goes down to experiment. Every plastic is different. Every paint is different. Every experience is different. It's possible, but do not do it on your main piece until you've tested it on some runner to make sure that it will work. Pardon me, I'm not going to edit that out. Far too lazy. Lon242, a regular. How do I prevent my models from looking flat and one-dimensional? Some armour modelers seem to be into dramatic tone variations on their kits, which may not always look realistic but can be interesting and eye-catching. Slightly more intense pre-shading, post-shading and oils. Mostly like the dot method. The other two things I'm looking to try. I have to expand the post. In future builds, any other ideas? I do a lot of armour. My earliest armour, if you look at my early armour playlist, my Airfix kits, I just painted them a straight colour, gave them a wash, called them finished. And they are very flat and interesting. And with my more current armour, I'm looking at doing shades. I get 2-3 different greens, if let's say I'm painting a green kit. From the lowest lights, I paint a very dark green, the whole thing, the base colour green, and at the top some highlights of a lighter green. I dry brush the edges in a very slight weathering manner, even though it's a clean build. I add a little bit of multiple tones of very heavily diluted washes for variation and tone, a form of blending. Some pigment weathering. I use a whole range of effects, weathering effects and shading effects. There are some people that overdo it. It's sort of like the wargaming look, your Warhammer 40k, where there's very dramatic highlights and lowlights, and they look pretty good. Though you are right, not exactly realistic. Talking and looking at some amazing award-winning 72nd armour at shows and stuff, the gist that I've got is you just do very, very subtle highlights and lowlights via airbrush in shading and building up shadowing, and then you just use a whole sliver and different array of skills in weathering, highlighting, detailing, washing, pigment weathering, dot filtering, but you make it really subtle, like it's almost not even noticeable. And when all these different effects build and layer, it just gives it more dimension. You can see the dust caught in panels, you can see the shading underneath raised areas, you can see a bit of dirt, you can see a bit of soot coming out of the engine. There's just all this extra dimension, and it just starts from looking like a cardboard cutout, and it just slowly morphs into something more interesting and realistic. It's not going to happen immediately. It's going to happen over a range and a couple of builds. Every build you try a new weathering method or a technique or something, and you just build it over something else you've done previously, and just make it very subtle. Sometimes it'll be too heavy, sometimes it won't be subtle enough and still kind of flat. But every time you do a build and you try something new, it starts to pop and look more interesting and more defined. I always talk about weathering is not all about making it dirty or telling a story or whatever. Even though telling a story is nice, it's adding definition and environment. You think about the environment, you attack those particular weathering methods, you do it very subtly, and you build it up over on top of each other. It could extend the time it takes to finish the build, but it just makes things a lot interesting. As an example, I shall pull out what is a fairly recent build. I built this one. No. Okay, whatever. I'm going to grab this guy and I am going to grab where is my aha, there you are, and this guy. So this is a build from 2 to 3 years ago. I painted it just green, ignore the dust, and there's a wash. It's not very interesting. Then I built this guy very recently, and he's more heavily weathered than others, but you could tell that there's a little highlights, there's a few washes, there's variation in tones of the straight colour and rust and whatnot. And thus just makes it a bit more interesting. I'll put these away before you get too bored with me fiddling around with my models in the background, but that's the gist. My apologies. What do you think of black base priming? That is starting with a black primer base and adding colour on top of it while trying to keep shading and shadowing where you want them. You can sort of pre-shade in reverse using this method. Have you ever tried it before? I used to do this method. I used to think it's really cool. Sometimes it can come to an advantage if you're making a dark, gritty, overshadowed kit. It's going to look very dark. It's going to be hard to add colour and add vibrancy and interest. If you just pre-shade black and just have a very vibrant background, it's going to look more vibrant and the colours are just going to come alive, because with a solid black background and you build up colours on top of it, if the pigment density is low, whatever the undercoat is, the light is going to absorb. So if you put a colour over black, it's going to look duller. If you build up a few colours, it's still going to look darkish. If you have a white background and pre-shade black, those panels will look dark, but the main base background is going to be a little more vibrant. It's going to have a little more bounce. It's going to just have a little more interest and eye attractiveness. A dark model could look very cool, and a standalone thing, it's nice. Take a competition and you put it in front of a lot of models that have a grey or white primer, it's going to just sort of morph and disappear in front of something that's brighter. The human eye catches the brightest and most interesting item. So if there's a lightly bright thing that's painted and designed in a way that a certain aspect catches your eye, and you look at a table of a heap of models, you're going to look at the brightest and most interesting model. So it does have probably more disadvantages than advantages. Probably the advantages, it's easier, paint it black, then you just colour the inner bits with colours and shade. But with the little extra effort of having a bright undercoat, probably outweighs the advantage and is better. This is why I do not use a black undercoat unless I'm going with a high gloss or very shiny premium metallics. How do I prevent master grades from being so stiff, tight-fitting after painting? I would assume a lot of sanding would be necessary. That is completely correct. That's with anything. If there's any joints that are touching, you're going to use files, sanding, whatnot, and just really sand areas that are likely to touch. And you sand it down to the point where the model feels very loose, and you'll paint it, you'll put it together, and it might have some elements of still being slightly loose here and there, not snapping and holding form. That's when after painting, gluing it together will be required. So peg holes drilled out ever so slightly more, points of articulation and pegs that snap together will have to be masked with blue tack. Any sort of joint where plastic is touching plastic, or there's any points of holding tension, is going to have to be sanded. If there's a lot of polycaps are our friend. Polycaps reject paint. They'll still need to be masked with blue tack. So yeah, lots of preparation, lots of sanding. The finished result is always very worthwhile. It's probably the slowest method out there, but it's going to produce a great result. Slightly long-winded question this time, but I enjoy hearing your experienced perspective and appreciate your answers. Thanks, mate. Thank you very much, Lon. I enjoyed your questions. I hope it was informative and interesting for the other viewers. Leo Stewart. Are there any general use lacquer primers that you recommend? I have experimented with generic lacquer primers. My friend who goes to Xeon has also. Has practically foregone any hobby brand primers, and he is purely sticking with automotive primers, mostly brands that are very familiar in Australia. The in-house super cheap auto primers via rattle can and tin. I've used a Steppertone primer with a fair amount of success. It was very thick, so it took a lot of preparation of thinning, just a tiny bit of primer and something like 4 or 5 times the amount of thinner. I find generic primers, because they're a bit rougher, a bit thicker, they're great for filling and whatnot. If you're doing a lot of modifications, a lot of scratch building, and you put that, it's going to cover a lot of dents, scratches, sandpaper marks, little gaps in your work, and you sand it back. But I always revert back to a hobby primer as the final layer of primer before I put my paints on. So overseas, just look for a premium small tin of automotive primer. Most of the time you'll find it in a rattle can, so you can decant it or apply it directly from the rattle can. Could be a bit thick. This is good to test for any imperfections. Sand back, but then apply a hobby primer. Applying hobby primers via Airbrush is always fairly cost effective. If you find that the right automotive or general purpose lacquer primer is really thin, works like a hobby primer, and it just applies perfectly, stick to it, share it, tell other people, get other people to try it out and see if it can become a trend, because unfortunately all I can share is, with the generic stuff, products that exist in Australia, and that may not be good for anybody else who the majority of my viewers are from the US and across Asia. Absolutely no good for them. So find out and share among people within your country and area of residence. Stephen Benside. Hello. Hello, Stephen. I've been having trouble getting a 3mm needle for my airbrush off eBay, as you suggested. It is very strange, as eBay clearly told me that it was a 3mm, but it did not fit my Mr. Protocon boy. Do you have any idea why this might be? Perhaps because it might be a Chinese supplier. Thank you very much for any help. I look forward to more videos. More detail in my Honing Your Airbrush Skills video. I focus around the DH103 style of airbrush, which is the popular airbrush that's been abandoned by companies such as Sparmax, and has been picked up by cheaper Chinese manufacturers such as Delta, hseng, all these other companies that produced quite cheap, and they produce the parts for them, so they fit perfectly. And if you go out and buy a name brand DH103 airbrush by Mr. Hobby or Sparmax, Tamir also rebadges the Sparmax, it fits perfectly because it's from the original old pattern, the original old airbrush. This is all a family of one style of airbrush where all the components are interchangeable and generic. I've also mentioned name brands such as Iwata, Hardback, AirTech, and your Protocon boy. Protocon boy is quite a premium airbrush. They are designed so you only buy their parts, use their surfaces, everything. They make a little more money by you going via their brand. So with a Protocon boy, you'll need to use a Protocon boy nozzle and needle. So eBay will be no good. The majority of suppliers eBay sells are DH103 components. If you type in Mr. Protocon boy parts, you may be lucky. Someone might do an aftermarket manufacture job. I highly doubt it, but you may want to shop around some airbrush supply shops. I go to one in Australia called Runway 13. They get a lot of parts in. You may want to just see if there's something there, or just really big airbrush online stores that have large parts catalogues can be a bit pricey. This is why I recommend that if you use that as your main airbrush and you love shading detailing, you use it for the finer works. You buy a DH103, be it a Sparmax or a cheaper knockoff, and use that to do your heavy dirty work like your primers and top coats and stuff that's likely to clog it up, damage it, whatnot. So I hope that answers your question. I know Mr. Hobby did carry Mr. Protocon Boy for a period of time. They've just rebadged just other brands, and if they've rebadged a Sparmax and a Protocon Boy side by side, it is a bit tricky because they do not carry the spare parts and you have to go to the original manufacturer. Luckily they tell you who the original manufacturers are. Hope that was of some sort of assistance. Mr. Max von 2, where should I start for German World War II tank modelling? Specific companies and paints, that would be really useful. For 35th scale, the first go-to is normally Dragon. Dragon has the biggest range of Tigers and Panzer IVs. They have every variant under the sun, so if you want to sort of just do all the really common stuff and all the variants, you can build up the Dragons. If you want to go for some really premium stuff, Meng and Takon, if they have a German subject, they're starting to become the best brands of the 35th scale genre. If you want to go into different variants, Tamiya. If Tamiya is available, newer Tamiya 35th kits are pretty brilliant, and they should have some German subjects. Brands that I would avoid is Italiari and probably Revell and whatnot. A bit of low end, low grade. They're harder to build, less interesting, less appreciative. They are from an older generation. They're marketed to a different group of people. They're probably more enjoyable by younger kids as they're cheaper. They're easy and quick to put together. So that would be a really good start. Grab your chops around a Dragon. Actually, anything that's manufactured from China. China's been doing some wonderful military stuff. If you're going to 72nd, which is my realm, there is a lot of wonderful options in 72nd. My favourite brand being S-Model. S-Model is doing a lot of German armours. A lot of fun. I absolutely enjoy them. So you gotta, if you do 72nd, you gotta jump into some S-Model. Pegasus. Pegasus does paper panzers and very weird, unusual World War II subjects. They do the mouse, the Panzer 8. You got to do Panzer 8. If you want one in 35th scale, Cyber Hobbies. Cyber Hobbies is another good one. They do quite a lovely mouse. Dragon. Now Dragon's not bad in 35th. 72nd, they're highly hit and miss. They're extremely detailed and they look great, but their instructions are normally always wrong and they're just very tricky to put together. Maybe once you've got a few 35th scale kits under your belt, you can attempt some Dragons. They've got some very appealing subjects and box arts. Do a review, look up reviews of the Dragon kit if it's really tricky or not. Their self-propelled guns are probably best to be avoided. Some of their basic looking paper panzers are pretty cool. Their Stugs, their Panzer IVs, their Tigers are hit and miss. So yeah, need to do a bit of research around them. And then there's just a whole level of different manufacturers. There's a lot of older brands still kicking around, such as Airfix and whatnot. If you want to try a classic kit, a lot of the Airfix German stuff are not too bad. There are other brands, there are other types can definitely be hit and miss. Revell, their new stuff are pretty good, but they're more so modern tanks. Their old stuff are generally stuff made 20-30 years ago by a different brand. So just see what are new releases and jump on that. But if you're just going to purely focus on Dragon, S-Model and Pegasus, you'll have a lot of subjects to keep going for ages. There is also a couple of wargaming companies that do a couple of kits per box, such as forget the name of the brand. Have a look at my playlist. I've done a couple of German wargaming ones. They came out really nice. Plastic Soldier. Plastic Soldier company makes only very few German armour, but they're really cool. They just snap together in no time and fun to paint. And that's about it. That's all I can get on to at the top of my head, because I'm not really in a tank mood at the moment, so I haven't touched a tank kit for a little while. John Tam. Is it possible to change PG Banshee Norm transparent yellow parts to transparent blue or green by airbrushing? By green, very easy. Just paint transparent blue very lightly. It'll appear to look green. From yellow to blue, you just have to put a few more layers of blue and it'll appear blue, or just be a little less transparent. As I've answered the other guy talking about transparent parts, get some of the runners that are clear, practice on that. If it looks good, then do it on the transparent pieces. Prime with a clear lacquer, and then do a top coat with a clear lacquer. Allow a lot of time to dry, because it's sitting on a very smooth surface, so don't touch it for like 3 to 4 days. It could have a slight scratch risk, so snap it together very carefully. Leo Stewart. How beneficial is it to sand before priming? It is very beneficial. If you're, let's say, doing a smooth kit, let's talk Gundam. If you want a very smooth high gloss finish, you sand, you polish, you prime. It's going to look very glossy. If you want a matte finish, you sand it, rough it up with about 300 grit sandpaper, you prime. It's going to look more matte because the shiny reflective surface of the polished Gundam parts have been removed. Primer sits on top of plastic, it etches in. A lot of manufacturers, some are rougher, some are smoother. Something like Gundam and resin kits are very smooth. It's beneficial to remove that polished surface, because it leaves all these scratches, and the primer seeps into those scratches and then they level it off, so it looks smooth on top, but it's just etching into it and biting into it, and it's just got far greater adhesion. This is probably a lot more important for resin than it is for plastic. For plastic, because it is a very soft plastic that's affected by solvents. The solvent also chemically digs into it. So in the end, you don't really need to. If you do, there is ever so slight benefits. There's probably more benefits as a finish than adhesion. For resin, you're more or less, or any other material, you're more or less got to do it. But there's times I've done it, there's times I've not done it. If it's lacquers, it always sticks. If you're using non-lacquer primer, like if you're painting Valleos, using Vallejo primer and everything's acrylic, it's probably best to do that, because their primers are not very grippy, they don't adhere very well. So any advantage you can get to make it stick to the surface, you take, and sanding it is almost guaranteed a good idea. Last question on the list, a Cyber New type. How powerful should my spray booth fan be if I'm airbrushing lacquers indoor? Can you recommend a good one? There's a series of very cheap fold-up ones on eBay. They're very cheap, about $100 or so. Highly recommended. The Sparmax one's not too bad, but expensive. They both have roughly the same powerful motor. If you're building a DIY one, just grab whatever they use in bathrooms, and then use that weird fluffy stuff in aquariums to filter water for fish tanks. Now the trick to suction strength with extractor booths for airbrushing indoors is the more dirty and clogged the filter gets, the weaker your fan is. So your fan is at a set strength, and then over time it gets weaker and weaker because it's sucking through crap in your filter. Your filter will need to be cleaned out extremely regularly, almost all the time, or replaced regularly to get full strength. If you just let it clog up, it's going to get weaker and weaker and weaker, and your house is going to smell of lacquers, and whoever you're living with is going to be quite upset and disappointed with you. I've also learnt recently, and this is pretty cool, shout out to Ryan and Hobbyco Australia, if you do not have anywhere to vent your fumes, if you're indoor in the centre of the house, no windows, no doors, nowhere to vent, This is called the bong method, which I've named if anyone has ever smoked a tobacco bong before. You get a bucket of water and you put the hose into that. So it sucks the fumes, goes through the filter, goes and filters again through the water, and it comes out. The water gets dirty over time, as if you're smoking. You get all the crap that goes through the water, the goodness goes in your lungs, and the water gets dirty. So not recommending for anyone to smoke out there anything or whatever, but it's a pretty good and interesting method. You can build a rig by having a plastic box, a bucket of water inside, a hole cut in the plastic box with the hose feeding in, so if the bucket somehow falls over, it's going to be captured by the plastic crate and not spill everywhere where there might be fragiles, carpet or electricals. I received 2 questions I thought were interesting on Facebook. One question was a discussion regarding hand painting and hand painting in lacquers. My tutorials on hand painting in lacquers are very old. People are not wary about them, but they still stand. If you wish to hand paint with a lacquer primer, all you have to do is thin it further than 50-50 and add a little retardant. Once you've mixed the slurry very well, you apply it very thin. It's going to look transparent. It's going to look like marble. It's going to look like arse. You allow that to dry to the touch, and then you keep applying very thin coats until it builds up. You'll notice when you get the finished product, there'll be no brush streaks, there'll be no bubbles, there'll be no weird weak spots. If there is an ever so slight texture, you can sand it back with 2000 grit sandpaper wet. And that goes the same with lacquer base colours. If you want to paint metallics, you thin it even further to alclad level, so probably 2 parts thinner, 1 part paint. And with metallics, you just dabble the tiny amount of this watered down metallic on your brush, particularly premium metallics, and you dry brush it until your brush goes completely dry. And it virtually also immediately dries on the surface, and you keep finely brushing it on until it builds up. Again, no imperfections, no brush strokes, looks pretty amazing, especially on a gloss back undercoat. Another question among the Mecha Musume figure sculpting community: how to sculpt anime hair on figures. Generally, it's very easy to do. It's one of the most easiest things to sculpt. Avoid milliput. Milliput is a bit brittle. It does not hold small shapes. It's good for filling crevices. It's good for making large objects. Small thin parts, it just has a tendency of crumbling, especially if you have not mixed it thoroughly. Face it, not everyone mixes it thoroughly. You want to use something a bit more flex, a bit more premium. Tamiya 2-part epoxies, even though expensive, the quick type is really good for sculpting the hair. It holds shape, it's got some flex, you can sand it later without falling apart. And it dries immediately, quickly. Green stuff is amazing. Everybody's thinking, you know, green stuff too expensive. 6 inches for about 20 bucks from Games Workshop. No, go on eBay, type in green stuff, look for 100 grams or 36 inches. There's another manufacturer that makes green stuff, and they'll sell you a massive amount for about the price of 12 inches of Games Workshop stuff. You can get 36 inches in a long tape, or these 2 massive amounts in tubes. The tubes are a bit hard to use because they stick to the inside of the plastic, so buy the tape. And that's quite a wonderful thing the wargaming community is doing. Last, I've received some criticism on a very old recast soft vinyl kit I built, and it was calling me out as a thief, and just pretty much criticising that I do have a Patreon. I do not push or market my Patreon heavily. It is a tip jar. If I've helped you out extensively, and if the tutorials have been of help, and if you want to throw me $1, as if you would throw $1 to a busker playing a guitar outside your supermarket, that's cool. I don't care. It's appreciation of tutorial work. I do indulge in recast models, and I also do stand against bootlegging to a degree. Now, I have a investment interest and stake in the distribution of Bandai Gundam kits in Australia. My club is sponsored by Hobbyco to a certain degree. We have the Gunpla Builders World Cup. We have the campaign card giveaway thing where you get a card and you can win all these amazing prizes online that's only advertised to Australia. They've got the same thing for Malaysia, Philippines, Japan, China, whatnot. So I enjoy the Gunpla Builders World Cup. I enjoy all these benefits. I enjoy the anime being freely streamed on YouTube. In return, you pay a ever so slightly higher price or inflated price from local hobby shops, and instead of going online or buying bootlegs. And this way we get all these extra social services from the money that pulls together. If you buy a lot of bootlegs, import from Hobbylink Japan or whatever, there's not as much money in this pool, and there's a chance of the Gunpla Builders World Cup being withdrawn, as well as free anime and the campaign card thing. So it's an interest to me, it's interest to a lot of people in my community, it's an interest to a lot of people that do not want to do it. They think there's a better benefits of buying bootlegs, buying from Hobbylink Japan. They do not contribute to Gunpla Builders World Cup. They don't enter in the card campaign. That's cool. They do their own thing. They're locked in their own community. No one bothers them. If you're double dipping, you demand campaign cards and entering the Gunpla Builders World Cup and not contributing to local stores who go via the official distributor, that's a bit hypocritical. But still, I'm not going to criticise that. I don't really care. I promote. I leave it out there. I do my own thing. So I am likely to buy my Gundam kits from official retailers in Australia, and I benefit these social things. Now, when it comes to buying a anime figure resin kit, soft vinyl kit from an anime 30 years ago that was in production 20 years ago, never been seen again, the company's out of business, the copyright holders make zero money, and I would like to enjoy it. It has no implications on anybody. If a small run Wonderfest figure comes out, they sell 100 copies in Japan, and that's it. Production stops. The licensing fee goes to the license holder. It goes to Hong Kong somehow, and it's recasted, and they make 1,000 copies. I will indulge in that because I cannot find the original. One, I have no interest in supporting the original company because besides releasing that one figure, that's it. That's all they've really done. They don't host competitions. There's no social services. There's nothing further. They're not going to promise to release 20 figures every year and have one available for me to buy easily, cheaply in Australia. Buying it off an auction website like Mandarake or a scab on eBay that buys it from the event and sells it for 3 to 5 times the amount, the money's not going to the creator. The creator sold the original one. It's going to the scalper. It's going to the auction site. So realistically, I don't care. I'm going to steal. Realistically, we're all scale modelers. We buy a kit that's based off an IP of a thing that's existed in history or from a copyright subject. We build it, we paint it, we call it our own. All we've done is assemble and paint it and calling it artwork. So realistically, all scale modelers are thieves unless you scratch build something from absolute scratch. You base that off a copyrighted character, you're still a thief, and everyone has had some sort of original idea a long time ago. As the South Park joke goes, Simpsons has done it first. So realistically, we just need to look at it at a very keen eye, not piss off each other. If you're very keen on supporting the original creators and you go through their channels and buy it, good on you, man. Thumbs up. If you don't want to buy a recast and miss out, that's alright. People that buy recasts, thumbs up. Whatever. People that bootleg Gundam kits, which I don't recommend or condone, good luck. You may get a really big backlash from the community. Entering competitions and posting areas may be a bit of a pain, but you're doing what you want to do. Just do some research, see what's the pros and cons, decide what you want to do. I have decided what I want to do. I'm very happy, and it just sort of works out. I think it's best to be responsible and mature as modelers and not attack each other, but it's generally just happens anyway. That all is said and done. That was just an interesting thing. I thought people might be interested as bootlegs come into discussion here and there. I made a series of videos a little while ago when it was really prevalent on YouTube, and there was a thing saying that bootlegs are far more superior than Bandai. I felt that this was incorrect, and sort of just diminishes people that work on a real Bandai kit opposed to people that slap a bunch of cheap stuff together. It's a lot more work to make it look really good, or it just cheapens your experience. If you're in a country that you can't afford the real thing and whatever, you do what you do, but people just share it and do as they please. And exactly, man, just have fun with the hobby, carry on, and that's just my opinion. Don't really care. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, until next time, I will be doing another Q&A session next month. Not sure when the next Honing Your Airbrush Skills will be, because I am not currently airbrushing, except for one model a few weeks ago that does not warrant a video about. Going to be doing a lot of 3D printing, and we will see you all shortly in my next video. Chill out and have a good one.